This week, we are going to be talking about ecosystems and biomes. And so I'm going to review the concept of a system. When we talk about systems, remember that we are talking about things that have storages and flows. So a good example of a system that we've already talked about is the hydrological cycle, so that water can be stored in the ocean, and then through evaporation, it moves out up into the atmosphere, which is a flow. And then clouds form and air currents take the clouds over the land, and then precipitation happens. So rainfall and snow happens, and it brings fresh water to the land area. Now, one of the interesting things about these systems is that they have patterns, right? So they are not chaotic. So from these patterns, we can make predictions. So we can make predictions about how much rainfall a given area is going to get as opposed to another area. We can talk about when we think that rain is going to fall, right? So we can make some, it's a way to think about the world in an ordered way. So they tend to exhibit these patterns, which are non-random. Okay, so we can talk about systems in terms of biological systems. We could also talk about physical systems. We could talk about social systems or economic systems. So one interesting thing about these systems is that we might talk about whether or not they have goals. So let's take, for example, a biological system. So what we find is that we have species evolving, and they tend to evolve so that they can maximize their fitness. So in a biological system, we have changes in organisms over time that increase their likelihood of surviving and reproducing, or their probability. So the mechanism that drives this is what is referred to as natural selection. So we say that natural selection is not random. It's not the only way that organisms change over time. There is a mechanism. Mutations, for example, are random. Mutations are random. And there's other mechanisms of change, like genetic drift, which causes populations to just change based upon more random factors. But natural selection would be non-random, hence the selection part of it. And so this means that organisms can change in response to environmental changes. And this is really important. So we can talk about the specific adaptations that organisms have, say, for example, to desert climates. So we can talk about these adaptations in plants, and we can talk about them in animals as well, that make them more able to survive in a particular environmental condition. So this would be an example of having goals in a biological system. We can also talk about social systems. And so in this course, we're talking about how humans influence the environment and how our social systems might be able to change in order to increase their sustainability. So I would say a goal of a social system in terms of environmental science is to increase sustainability. So we talked about the very beginning of the class. So for example, this is the ability to use resources in such a way that they can be replenished over time, right? That would be one example of sustainability. We could also talk about another system like an economic system. And remember that environmental science is very, very interdisciplinary. So we can talk about the economic system. And we can talk about sustainability in terms of economics. But one of the things that economic systems try to, one of their goals would be to increase efficiency. Right? So when we talk about the cost of something, the benefit should be greater than the cost. And one of the things that's interesting about the economic system is we can actually apply this to biology. We can apply this to species that are not human. So we could talk about an example in animals, which would be foraging. So when we talk about the way that birds forage, for example, we could talk about the cost of having to find prey, the cost of maybe if they're eating seeds, for example, of breaking open the seed, right? And then we could talk about the benefit. So the benefit would be the nutrients that they receive. And so we see that organisms try to, and this kind of goes back to the biological system, where we see that there is an efficiency, right, in an animal's use of energy, so that they're going to try to obtain as much nutrients for as little cost as possible. And that would actually drive natural selection, because those individuals would be more likely to survive and to reproduce and to pass their genes on into the next generation. So these are just some ideas about how systems are important. We can use them to make predictions. They're random, they're predictable, and that we can talk about some of the systems that we have as humans set up. What are the goals of those systems? What should the goals be? And then look at the goals of natural systems as well.